This week on Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast.
Imagine I have a coffee cup in front of me. This is how much energy, we'll say, a child has. The less structure we create, the more of this finite cup is consumed by, am I in the green home? Am I in the blue home? What's going to be for dinner? Are mom and dad going to be arguing? Do I have to go to school today? What are the rules? How do I succeed? And then if you subtract that from the cup's full capacity, you're left with just a drip for ABC 1, 2, 3, that sort of thing.
Welcome to Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast, where we discuss strategies and tips to improve your co-parenting situation, especially if it's high conflict. I'm Bianca Ballo, co-parent, mother, and entrepreneur, creator of Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger app, and believer in turning challenging situations into something positive. This week, we're joined by Dr. Ben Garber, and we're talking about structure in co-parenting and how it can reduce anxiety and therefore reduce conflict. Isn't that what we all want? Conflict-free co-parenting. I'm excited to dive into this conversation with Ben Garber, but first let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a psychologist, a former guardian ad litem, a parenting coordinator, and an author of several books on parenting. So happy to have you with me here today, Ben. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bianca. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Tell our listeners a little bit more about you.
Bianca, as you said, I'm a New Hampshire licensed psychologist. I do a lot of work in the family courts. My career has taken me from spending a lot of time providing individual child psychotherapy, crawling around the floor with little kids, talking to their parents, to consulting with courts and lawyers and guardians ad litem, trying to help the people who make decisions make those decisions in the best interest of their children.
All right. Well, how did you get into that line of work?
Ooh, how long do you have for that answer? Long ago and far away, I worked in a clinic setting in which it appeared that as many as 7 or 8 out of every 10 children referred for individual child psychotherapy seemed to be diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, with or without the H, with or without hyperactivity. That just is statistically really unlikely because ADD and ADHD are real, but they don't occur with that frequency. Turns out when you look into it, and your listeners may be very interested in this, when you look into it, a lot of kids are mistakenly diagnosed with ADD and ADHD, not because they have the neurological differences that define that disorder or those qualities, but in fact, because they wake up and go to sleep in chaotic homes. If you don't know who's going to be there, whether mom and dad are going to be beating each other up, whether there's going to be breakfast on the table, or even which home you're going to be going to, it's awful hard to pay attention to ABC 1, 2, 3, to comply with authority. You'll seem distractible, you'll get in a lot of trouble. And if you only look at the individual child in that circumstance, it's easy to label them. So I found myself taking a step back, looking beyond the individual child, instead looking at the family system. When you begin to focus at the level of the system, the dynamics or the relationships, it's easy to begin to understand how those very things, relationships and family system dynamics, can create all sorts of dysfunction. And you can't fix a kid like that by giving him a dose of methylphenidate or putting them on an IEP. You need to help that child by helping the family change how it's functioning.
All right.
That's how.
And that actually is a good segue into our topic today, which is all about structure. And I'm guessing that this is very much related to what you're talking about.
Well, it all fits together, Bianca. Structure reduces anxiety. That is universally true across cultures, even across species. If you've ever raised a dog, lots of people who have pets at home understand that a dog will feel better if he has a crate. The crate isn't a place that you punish the animal. The crate is a form of structure. It gives the dog the reassurance that he has a place to go to calm down, to settle where he's going to be safe. In fact, that's what we all need, no matter our species, no matter our circumstance, is the certainty that we have a home base or an anchor, an opportunity, a reliable opportunity to calm down and blow off steam. Structure comes in 4 different forms. Am I going too fast here for you?
No, it's great. Keep going.
Structure comes in 4 different forms. Applying these forms as a parent to improve your child's well-being, to improve the quality of your co-parenting relationship, or as an agency or an institution, as a school, as a court, as some sort of therapeutic provider, for example. Structure in all of these settings will improve the functioning not only of the adults involved, but the children who they serve. Those 4 types of structure are as follows. We talk about limits. People talk about setting limits all the time. Limits and associated consequences. But please let me caution, our culture hears the word consequences as if it's a synonym for punishment. That's not so. A consequence just means an if-then statement. And the consequence associated with the limit, should be, as often as possible, a positive, a reward. People will always succeed better and be in a better mood about it and get along with the people around them better if they know how to succeed. And the consequence, the positive consequence, the reward, is reliable and prompt and important to that person. I wouldn't work really hard to earn broccoli, but I work really hard to earn praise and to earn money and to earn time with my family and to earn vacation and things of that sort, because those are important to me. So with regard to the first form of structure, if you're a parent, the consequence has to be meaningful to the child. And not to go too far out on a limb here, but parents, and for that matter, co-parents and systems in general, need to be cautious about secondary gain and incidental rewards. For example, it's easy for a parent to imagine that a child will make his bed to earn a gold star. But if in fact the child gets more positive out of the attention of the parent from misbehaving, then the gold star is not going to be important and the attention will motivate the behavior. We see that all the time in the context of co-parenting, when, for example, Billy is in junior high school and acts up in math class and gets sent to the vice principal. He's sitting there in the vice principal's little office, and the vice principal calls mom and dad in to be with Billy because they're all going to wag their finger and scold him. Billy gets a detention, and that's supposed to be meaningful to him. But inside Billy's head, he's thinking, mom and dad are finally together. I've been wanting to get them back together for so long now. This worked. Guess what happens the next day? Billy acts up again. The intended consequence, the detention, was way less meaningful to the child than his perception of the positive outcome, which was his desire to reunite his conflicted parents. So we're talking about types of structure. Limits and associated consequences are the first. Boundaries are the second. Boundaries define space. In the context of co-parenting, assuming now that we're talking about conflicted parents who live apart, boundaries in one form are the distinction between mom's house and dad's house, or the two moms or the two dads, that doesn't matter. We're talking about what's true when you're with parent A versus what's true when you're with parent B. Lots of times I work with high conflict parents who complain that the child goes back and forth between the two homes, and there are overlaps of authority. The parent A says that parent B is trying to control what the child does in parent A's care, and vice versa. I want parent A, when he or she is the parent on duty. In the context of co-parenting, that's an important phrase, Bianca. Are you the parent on duty according to the parenting plan, according to whatever the structure is that's been imposed by the court? The parent on duty has authority over day-to-day decision-making. The parent on duty says to the child, look around, whose house are you in? What rules apply here? That's the structure of boundaries in that space. Siblings need boundaries as they grow that help them separate so that they can distinguish themselves and grow an identity. Sometimes we don't have space to give them each a room, but often it's easy to give them each at least a drawer in a chest. If they share a room, sometimes it's useful to put a tape line on the floor that distinguishes Billy's side of the room from Sammy's side of the room, that sort of thing. limits and consequences, boundaries that define space, roles. Roles are relevant to co-parents. For example, a moment ago, I defined the parent on duty. That's a role. If you share decision-making authority over a child, but the child is now in the other parent's care, you still have an important role in that child's life, but you're not the parent on duty, and that's an important distinction. Roles are furthermore important in the context of co-parenting. For example, there are often conflicts at the point of transition. The role is important to define in that circumstance. Are you the sending parent or are you the receiving parent? And we can define your responsibilities according to role. So if you and I, Bianca, once were together, now we're apart, we've got a 5-year-old little child, and we're debating where to do the transition because that child's going back and forth between us, we might say the sending parent always drives. And that saves us a lot of fuss and bother later on about, well, who's in charge of what part of this process here. It also makes the world clearer to the child because the child learns very quickly, I'm leaving mom's care, mom's the sending parent, mom will be driving, I know what to expect. That's one instance in which structure reduces anxiety. The child doesn't have to wonder who's going to drive, is there going to be a conflict when they're together, that sort of thing. 4 forms of structure. Limits and associated consequences, boundaries that define space, roles that define relationships, and the last one, rituals and routines that define time. I'm self-employed, so I create my own rituals and routines, and I'm pretty good at it. A lot of people have a boss, a lot of people punch a time clock, a lot of people have other people regulating their time for them. And we might fight against these things. Just as you draw a line in the sand, the first thing that's going to happen is a person puts their toe over the line. They test the limit. If we didn't have clocks, if we didn't know the day of the week or the month of the year or the year on the calendar, life would be chaos. If we didn't have limits and boundaries and roles, if we didn't know how to interact with each other, we didn't know how to succeed, we'd be anxious wrecks. So these 4 forms of structure, limits, boundaries, roles, and routines, help us diminish anxiety, and therefore we have fewer conflicts.
So is the goal to diminish anxiety completely, or is some anxiety actually good for you?
It's not a choice we can make. I have never had zero anxiety. I've never met anybody who's had none. Some base rate of anxiety is the simple tension of your body being upright and your eyes being open and your mind going. So, for example, I talk to kids in a clinical setting about how to manage their anxiety. So we talk about how full is your balloon. It can't be zero. Sure, you can have a flat balloon that you buy it and store that, but it's got at least a breath of air in it, and that's 1. And at 10, I won't startle your listeners here by exclaiming, but at 10, the balloon goes boom. So our goal is to keep anxiety, which is always going to be there to some degree or another, 7 and below. As anxiety increases, calm, rational, logical, mature thinking decreases. So that balloon goes up. If there's another balloon that starts full, and that's your mature thinking, it diminishes as the anxiety balloon increases. That's why we have to keep the anxiety balloon 7 and below so we can retain some modicum of reasonable, rational thought.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that explanation of different forms of structure. So as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about co-parenting, and as a co-parent with 2 young children, I'm thinking about how I can reduce my own anxiety by implementing some of these forms of structure, but also reducing my children's anxiety as well. It seems like it's on twofold. You can do it for yourself and you can do it for your children. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, but let me expand the idea a little bit. Have you ever seen Russian nesting dolls?
Yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Uh-huh.
So I don't know how to describe them exactly. There's a tiny little peanut of a doll that's painted one way, and then another doll just a shade larger that contains that peanut, and then another one a shade larger that contains the second. And I suppose you could have a zillion of those. So we think about systems or relationships the same way. And this could get really detailed, but let's start with the child or the parent-child relationship as the smallest nesting doll. That's contained within a larger system, and that might be the family system, depending on how you define it. And the family system is contained like a Russian nesting doll inside extended family, neighborhood, community, and at some level, some larger nesting doll is the court system. So everything we're saying applies at all of those levels of analysis, from the parent-child relationship all the way up to when the judge bangs the gavel and decrees a parenting plan. At all of those levels of analysis, more structure is better, not because the world should be regimented and rigid, but because people who can function maturely can make changes. But when they stop functioning maturely, they have the safety net of that structure to fall back on.
How can you reduce your anxiety in addition to the different forms of structure that you mentioned? Are there other ways that you can do this in addition to the 4 you mentioned?
Absolutely. I have to remind your listeners and myself that I'm not a physician, even though I'm going to talk about some physical health things now. Please always consult with your physician. Some people have a diagnosable anxiety condition, and some of those can be inherited or genetically predisposed. Some of us have lived through horrible trauma. We can defeat anxiety, or I should say that differently. We can minimize anxiety by doing things like making sure we have a healthy diet, sleeping well, and more than just sleeping well and more than just quantity of sleep, regulating our bodies. This is one aspect of structure. This is routine. Get in the habit of going to bed about the same time and waking up the same time. So many people complain about trouble falling asleep and sleeping in the morning and waking during the night. Our bodies seek regulation. If you could commit a month to eating at the same time, to going to bed at the same time, to waking up at the same time, that regulation will make you healthier and help to diminish anxiety. Exercise is a great way to diminish anxiety as well. I'll throw in one last bit, and that is, apart from everything we've said, everyone should be prepared for the idea that anxiety will spike sometimes. You don't expect it. I have a screen porch here in New Hampshire. It's summertime, it's warm out. I spend a lot of time on the screen porch. I recently went out on the screen porch, turned on the light switch to turn on the ceiling fan because it was a hot day, and there was a pop and a spark in the ceiling, and my anxiety spiked because I didn't want my house to burn down. No one could have predicted that some sort of animal had chewed through a wire. I ended up spending a lot of money on an electrician. I fixed the problem, but these things happen. You know, you get a flat tire on the road, child comes down sick, the boss wants you at work the same day that your co-parent is insisting that you take the child. We have to be prepared in advance for these sudden storms of anxiety. What do you do? Let me recommend to you 3 quick methods of managing anxiety, and they take practice. Imagery. Where do you feel safe and comfortable and relaxed in your life? Focus on that. Bottle it so that you can create in your mind the full 5 senses of that experience. A lot of people like to go to the beach. Can you close your eyes and see the sand, see the waves, see the horizon? Can you close your eyes and smell the salt, and can you hear the seagulls? Can you feel the sand between your toes as you dig down underneath that hot surface and into the moister depths of the sand? Can you smell it? What are the other senses? You've got the idea. So imagery. And you have to practice that. You have to do it. If you're going to take that month and regulate your routine, spend the same month practicing imagery a couple times a day, not just at bedtime. Paint that picture in your brain. Spend 5 minutes at it. By the end of that month, you'll be able to close your eyes for a moment in a nasty business meeting and go to the beach, and your blood pressure will decrease, your anxiety will diminish, you'll feel better.
I was just going to jump in and say, I love that example because I think intuitively, I think sometimes you do these things to reduce your own anxiety and you're not sure it's a thing, but you do it just because it helps. Like you're talking about imagery, and I was thinking, oh, I just did that the last time I was at the dentist when I was in the chair and I was having all this anxiety about like being there, and dentist is in my mouth and I'm I'm just nervous and it doesn't feel great. And I, closed my eyes and I started to imagine like the good place. And I was trying to feel everything, all the senses like you mentioned, and it does help. And I think it's
Yep.
a great example. So thank you for sharing that. What's the next one?
A progressive muscle relaxation I was about to talk about. Progressive muscle relaxation sometimes takes someone to guide you through it to start with. In your head with your eyes closed, wearing whatever suits you. You start with your toes and you intentionally clench your toes tight. And in your head, you count to 3 slowly. And then you let your toes go. And then you clench the instep of your foot tight. And in your head, you count to 3 and you let your instep go. And you're breathing consciously with this, taking a breath in, holding it while you count, letting the breath out when you release the muscle group, working your way up your body till you get to your face, which is one of the hardest parts to do because our faces are full of muscles and very expressive. You clench your face tight, which we're on video, even if your people can't see us right now. I'm not going to do it for you, but you can imagine clenching your face tight, making sure that your brows are tight, trying to clench your ears tight. Hold it with a breath for a count of 3 and then let it go. And each time you let it go, the muscle group will be more relaxed than when you start. Through the process, your whole body will relax. So imagery, progressive muscle relaxation, and implicit in all of this is the third one, that is deep breathing. Please don't do this or do this carefully if you have a pulmonary issue, if you're on certain medications. Make good choices. So my advice here is very generic. Consult with people that you know, professionals that you know, but deep breathing is exactly what it sounds like. Take a deep breath in through your mouth, hold it long and deep, and in your head count to 3, and then let it out through your nose slowly until your belly's empty of air. Count to 3 and then repeat that, and do that through 3 cycles, and your body will relax with each cycle of breathing. It's easy to do. It comes naturally to a lot of people. It's harder for others.
These are great techniques that I think you could teach your children, even if it works for you and you like the technique, you could kind of pass it down to help your children with their anxiety as well, I would imagine.
I agree, but let's change one word there. We're always better off not teaching our children, but showing our children, doing with our children. So I'd much rather you sit next to your child and do it with him or her than sit in a higher chair and say, Billy, now take a breath in, hold it for 3, and then let it go. Mm-hmm. Our kids do what we do much more often and easily than what we say.
Yeah, modeling the behavior. That's great.
Exactly.
So can you give me some more examples of structure and what that looks like in co-parenting?
Sure. Courts vary by jurisdiction tremendously. Depends on where you are, if you get divorced, if you're involved in the court system, but courts generate parenting plans. Some parenting plans are terribly vague, leaving all kinds of huge loopholes that parents fall into all the time, which is fine if you and your co-parent can communicate together. But for most of the people that I know professionally, the reason that I know them is that they can't communicate together, which means that the parenting plan needs to be bulletproof, needs to be really, really, really structured. And that may feel constraining to some people, but if you and your co-parent can find a way to cooperate, then you can agree to change those constraints to your mutual benefit. If you can't communicate and cooperate, you have that safety net to fall back on. So things like non-school Monday holidays. Well, in some areas, President's Day is, in other areas it isn't, and who gets the kid that day. And my pet peeve are parenting plans, two pet peeves. Parenting plans that say parent B will assume parenting responsibilities after school on school days, and parent A will deliver the child to school at the beginning of school. But who's the parent on duty during the school day? If Billy falls down on the playground and scratches his knee, who's supposed to be called? But my other pet peeve, and the much larger one that we have to, as a society, find a way to fix, kids grow up. So if you guys write a parenting plan for Billy when he's 3 with no foresight about Billy's different needs when he's 4 and 5 and 6 and 15 and 16 and 17, you are requiring parents to get into conflicts and to come back to court. Courts are overburdened anyway. We need to be writing parenting plans that anticipate development. So here's an example, and this is structure. Parenting plans can say things like, Billy will not be apart from either caregiver more consecutive nights than twice his age in years. Putting it that way sets an outer limit that changes as Billy grows. So the 5-year-old won't be away from either parent longer than 10 days. The 15-year-old might spend a month away in Europe with dad or mom, something of that sort. The 2-year-old has a maximum of 4 days. You get how it works. That's a sort of flexible, adaptable structure that can help co-parents avoid returning to court. You know what to expect. There's less conflict.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, like writing that parenting plan very specific and also anticipating the child's growing needs. And so, a follow up question for you, is consistency important when it comes to limit setting or not so much?
So limits and associated consequences, it's incredibly important, not only that they are consistent, but also that you follow through. So you can threaten and threaten and threaten and threaten consistently, but if there's no then following the if, you lose all authority and they become meaningless. Now, are you asking about consistency over time within a home or consistency over time between homes?
Well, actually, I was asking consistency within a home, but I also did want to bring up the question of when co-parents differ and their structure is different in each home, and what kind of an impact that can have on the child.
Yeah.
So,
Do you know people who travel, perhaps who travel internationally?
yes.
I do too. And they tell me that they travel for work. They tell me that waking up in Germany on Wednesday and Israel on Friday and Japan on Sunday drives them crazy because it's an entirely different culture and language and cuisine and dress. And it's just, they never know where they are. Kids can have a similar experience when they go back and forth between very disparate homes because mom has one language and one routine and one set of rules and serves one thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and dad has very different things. So kids can adapt, fortunately, most kids anyway, and they can learn that I'm at the green home and that means I got to take out the garbage and I'm likely to have Brussels sprouts for dinner tonight. And the days that I'm in the blue home, I'm probably going to have M&Ms for dinner and who cares about the garbage? Those sorts of things happen. But we serve our kids' needs by diminishing the attention they need to pay to those differences. So we're better off when consistency exists between two homes. Imagine I have a coffee cup in front of me. In fact, I have one here. This is how much energy, we'll say, a child has, any human being has. The more structure we create for that person, for that child, the more consistent the world, the more predictable the world, the less of that energy has to be devoted to figuring out where I am and how to succeed. And the more energy is available for things like making friends and learning ABC 1, 2, 3. And indeed, our job as parents is to help kids do that stuff so that they can grow up and be separate individuals. The less structure we create, the more of this finite cup is consumed by, am I in the green home? Am I in the blue home? What's going to be for dinner? Are mom and dad going to be arguing? Do I have to go to school today? What are the rules? How do I succeed? And then if you subtract that from the cup's full capacity, you're left with just a drip for ABC 1, 2, 3, that sort of thing. And that's in fact where we started this conversation, because those kids are easily mistaken for having ADD and ADHD. They're preoccupied by the stresses in their lives, the absence of structure. So the answer to your question, Bianca, is consistency is important.
Absolutely. And I think as co-parents, finding a way to agree and kind of flexing towards the middle where you can find that structure across both homes obviously serves your children much, much better. So great. So how many books have you written then? As I was looking, I was like, I don't know. It looks like it was at 10 or more or
as of Christmas of this year, I think it'll be 10. I have 2 coming out shortly. If you're giving me the opportunity to shamelessly promote myself, I'm glad to. Of my books, if your readers are going to, or your listeners are going to get into any single book that perhaps is most relevant to your topic, I'm really proud of and heartily recommend a book called Holding Tight, Letting Go. Holding Tight, Letting Go is about raising healthy kids in anxious times. It talks a lot about structure, and it talks about how hard it is, particularly given the state of the world, to allow your kids to fall down, scrape their knee, and figure out how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I found that one on Amazon, and there'll be links to Ben's books in the show notes. So, what about the roadmap to the parenting plan worksheet? That's another resource that you have created. That sounds like it's very relevant to this conversation.
It is indeed. Thank you for the reminder. The roadmap could help co-parents who are at least moderately cooperative to come up with their own parenting plan. But more generally, it's used in mediation when co-parents hire an impartial helper and need to walk their way one element at a time through understanding how a parenting plan is created and to gauge what they need moving forward to serve their children's best interests.
Okay. Any final thoughts for our listeners about structure and reducing anxiety?
Well, I guess I would recommend your webcast here, your podcast, as a way of diminishing anxiety. Talking to others and listening to information about things that are relevant to your life helps people feel like they're not crazy. They share certain burdens and responsibilities and opportunities with other human beings, and you gain perspective. I'd be thrilled if even one kernel of what we said gives each of your listeners some further avenue to help their kids and some greater way to diminish their own anxiety.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining me today.
My pleasure, Bianca. Best wishes to everybody. Raise healthy kids.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast. I hope the time was well spent and you got a lot out of the episode. If so, please rate and review the podcast. I would really appreciate it. If you're interested in sending me a feedback message, asking a question, suggesting a podcast topic or guest, or downloading Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as a tool for better communication with your co-parent, go to peacefulparentapp.com or see the links in the show notes. Have a great week, and as always, stay peaceful.